Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The dense, twisting trees of the dark forest loomed over the group of students as they stood on the edge of its border. Ethan glanced at Lila, her brows furrowed with a mixture of concern and excitement. Her green eyes reflected the sun filtering through the leaves, casting dancing shadows across her face. His heart raced, not from fear, but from anticipation. This was the moment they had trained for. Professor Talia stood before them, her presence commanding. "Hiren, you all know the rules." "Kai," she said, her voice firm but calm. 3 days inside the dark forest. Find the artifact and return with it. There will be no assistance. You will be on your own. Only the strongest, wisest, and most resourceful will succeed. Ethan felt a surge of determination. He had to succeed, not just for himself, but for his village, which had been suffering from raiders in recent months. With the right kind of power, he could protect them. "Remember, Professor," Talia continued, "the forest is not what it seemed. Magic runs deep in the ground here, and not all of it is kind. Stay together, trust your instincts, and for the love of the gods, don't be foolish." Ethan's grip tightened around his staff. He glanced at Lila again, her expression now serious. She caught his gaze and smiled softly. "We've got this." She whispered, though her tone held a note of uncertainty. The group was dismissed, and they began to file into the forest. The atmosphere shifted immediately as the trees swallowed them. The air was cooler, the light dimmer. Ethan felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. Every step felt like it echoed in the unnatural silence. Lila walked beside him, her fingers brushing against the bark of nearby trees, her nature magic sensing the energy pulsing through them. "The trees here are ancient," she murmured. "There say life in them, but it's incautious." "They know we here," Ethan replied. "Let's all be friendly." The further they went, the more the forest seemed to close in around them. The trees grew denser, their roots twisting across the path like giant serpents. Other students had branched off in different directions, forming smaller groups. Ethan had chosen to stick with Lila and 2 other classmates, Gareth and I. They moved in silence, alert to every sound, every flicker of movement in the underbrush. A rustling to their right made Gareth freeze, his sword half drawn. "What was that?" he whispered, eyes scanning the thick foliage. "Probably just an animal," Misha said, though her voice was shaky. She was a fire mage, her talents lying in destruction rather than subtlety. The forest seemed to unnerve her. Ethan raised his hand, signaling them to wait. The rustling grew louder, closer. His heart pounded in his chest, his mind racing through the possible threats they could face. But when the source of the noise emerged, it wasn't T.A.B. A man, or rather, what was left of one, stumbled from the tree. His clothes were torn, his face gaunt, and his eyes wild with terror. "Stay back," he rasped, holding up a shaking hand. Lila rushed forward, her concern overriding her caution. "What happened? Are you hurt?" The man's eyes darted around frantically as though he expected the forest itself to attack it. Says the guardian, ... It doesn't talk, ... When he collapsed before he could finish, his body going limp. Lila knelt beside him, checking for a pulse. "He sounds alive, but barely." Ethan scanned the trees, his grip on his staff tightening. "We need to keep moving. Whatever did this to him might still be out there. We can just leave him." Lila protested, her hands glowing with soft green light as she attempted to heal the man's wound. "There's no time," Gareth argued. "He's dead. Wait. We need to focus on the trial." Naya looked torn, but after a moment she nodded. "He sound right. We can risk it." Ethan hesitated, but ultimately agreed. "Lila, we'll find help for him when we return, but right now we have to keep going." Reluctantly, Lila stood, her magic fading. "This forest isn't just dangerous, Ethan," she said quietly, its stern anger. They pressed on, the atmosphere growing more oppressive with each step. The trees seemed to shift around them, and the ground beneath their feet felt uneven, as though it were alive. Ethan kept his senses sharp, but the eerie stillness weighed heavily on his mind. Hours passed, though it was impossible to tell in the perpetual twilight of the forest. They had no way of knowing if they were close to the artifact or even headed in the right direction. The forest played tricks on them. Sometimes they'd see distant lights, only to find them vanish upon approach. And then they found the ruin. The group stood at the edge of a clearing where the twisted trees gave way to ancient stone structures, half buried in the earth. Vines covered the crumbling walls, and strange symbols were etched into the stone. The air here felt different, heavier, as though it were laden with the weight of centuries. "This must be it," Ethan said, awe creeping into his voice. "The artifact has to be here." Gareth was already moving toward the ruins, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. "We need to split up, cover more ground." Ethan hesitated, his instincts warning him against it, but he couldn't deny the logic. "Stay close. If anything happens, call out." As they spread out, Ethan could shake the feeling that they were being watched. The shadows seemed to move, the air crackling with unseen magic. He approached one of the larger stone structures, a half-collapsed building that might have once been a temple. As he stepped inside, he felt a chill run down his spine. At the center of the room was a pedestal, and atop it sat a small, glowing orb, the artifact. He moved toward it cautiously, his hand outstretched, but as his fingers brushed the orb, the ground beneath him shifted, and a voice echoed through the chamber. "Humans, you dare trespass upon sacred ground." Ethan froze, his heart leaping into his throat. The voice was deep and resonant, filled with centuries of anger and pain. From the shadows, a figure emerged, tall and regal, with skin like bark and eyes that glowed with an otherworldly light. This was no human. This was a Sylvan, a member of the ancient race long thought extinct. "You seek power as all your kind does," the Sylvan said, his voice laced with disdain, "but you will find only death here." Ethan swallowed hard, stepping back from the pedestal. "We didn't she mean to?" "Mean to what?" the Sylvan interrupted, "stepping closer to desecrate our home, to steal what is not yours." Layla appeared at the entrance, her eyes wide with shock as she saw the Sylvan. "Wait, we didn't know." The Sylvan's gaze shifted to her, and his expression softened slightly. "Nature, magic," he said quietly. "You have not forgotten entirely." Ethan stepped forward, his mind racing. "We were sent here as part of a trial. We didn't know about your people or the forest, Sistri." "And now you do," the Sylvan replied coldly. "But knowledge alone will not save you. The Guardian will come, and it will not show mercy." Ethan's heart sank. The man they had found earlier, the one who had warned them. This was what he had been talking about. "We have to leave," Lila whispered urgently, her eyes filled with fear. "We can fight this." But before they could react, the ground beneath them trembled, and a deep, rumbling growl filled the air. The Guardian had awakened. The ground shook violently, sending Ethan and Lila tumbling to the floor of the ancient temple. The Sylvan elder, Aurelian, stood firm, his glowing eyes narrowing as the rumbling grew louder. From the depths of the forest, an enormous figure emerged, an amalgamation of wood, stone, and elemental magic. The Guardian. It towered over them, its form a twisted mass of living trees, its face indistinguishable from the shifting branches and vines that wrapped around its body. Eyes like burning embers glared down at them, its breath a low, guttural growl that reverberated through the air. Lila scrambled to her feet, her heart pounding in her chest. "We have to stop it," she gasped, her voice trembling.
"Right.
"If we don't, it'll kill us." Ethan felt his pulse quicken, but something inside him froze. Power, immense and raw, radiated from the Guardian. He gripped his staff tightly, but deep down, he knew their magic would be no match for this ancient force. Aurelian stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "This is your doing, human. The Guardian was never meant to be awakened. It protects this forest and all that remains of the Sylvans. It will not stop until you're gone." "Then help us," Ethan pleaded. "If we didn't come here to destroy your people, we didn't even know about the Sylvans until now." The Sylvan elder hesitated, his gaze shifting between Ethan and Lila. "You speak as though your intentions are pure, Chai," he said, his voice heavy with distrust. "But your kind has always sought power, no matter the cost. The Guardian was summoned because of that greed." Lila stepped forward, her voice soft but steady. "Please, let us prove that we're different. We didn't come here for power. We came to learn to grow. We don't want to hurt you or your people." For a long moment, Ilian said nothing. His ancient eyes seemed to search for something in Lila, something he wasn't sure he defined. Finally, he sighed, the weight of centuries evident in his voice. "You may have the chance to prove yourselves, but know this, the Guardian will not be easily swayed." Ethan glanced at the towering figure, his mind racing. How do we stop it? But he asked, already feeling the ground tremble as the Guardian took another step forward, its massive body causing the earth to quake beneath them. Erlian closed his eyes for a moment, as if summoning a memory, long buried. The Guardian was created to protect the Sylvan legacy from destruction. It is bound to the forest, to its magic. If you can show it that you mean no harm, that you are willing to protect what remains of the Sylvans, it may listen. But how? Ethan asked desperately. Lila's eyes flickered with realization. The Guardian isn't just a force of destruction. It's a part of the forest of nature itself. We need to show it that we understand, that we respect the balance here. Erlian nodded slowly. Yes, but you must hurry. The longer the Guardian is active, the more destruction it will cause. It will not stop until it believes the threat is gone. Ethan's mind raced. Show it respect. Understand the balance. But all his life, he'd have been taught that magic was a tool to be wielded, a means of control. How could they make the Guardian see that they weren't a threat? Lila closed her eyes, her hand hovering over the ground. Soft, green light emanated from her fingertips, flowing into the earth beneath her. The ground responded to her magic, the tremors lessening as the forest seemed to breathe in time with her. Lila, what are you doing? I am speaking to it, she whispered. Toth, the Guardian, is part of the forest. If we can connect with it, we might be able to make it understand. The Guardian's massive form shifted, its glowing eyes narrowing as it regarded Lila. For a moment it hesitated, its movement slowing, but then with a deafening roar, it lashed out, a massive wooden arm crashing down toward them. Ethan reacted instinctively, throwing up a shield of magic that barely deflected the blow. The force of the impact sent him sprawling, the sheer power of the Guardian overwhelming him. His heart raced in his chest, fear gripping him tightly. Lila, it's not working, he shouted, struggling to his feet. But Lila didn't respond. She remained where she was, her eyes closed, her magic flowing into the earth. Ethan could see the strain on her face, the sweat beading on her forehead. She was trying to communicate with the Guardian, but it wasn't tough enough. Ethan's sense mind raced. They needed more. The Guardian, no. It had been created to defend the Sylvans, to guard against the greed and destruction of humanity. But they weren't here to destroy, they were here to learn to understand. He stepped forward, placing his hand on the ground next to Lila. He wasn't skilled in nature magic, but he could feel the pulse of life beneath his fingers. The earth was alive, filled with the memories of the past, the weight of centuries of history. And in that moment, he realized what they needed to do. We were not your enemies, Ethan whispered, his voice low but steady. We don't want to destroy your home. We came here because we wanted to prove ourselves. But we see now that power isn't what we need, understanding it. The Guardian paused, its massive form still looming over them, but the anger in its eyes seemed to flicker. Ethan continued, his voice growing stronger. We respect the forest. We respect what it means to you, to the Sylvans. We don't want to take anything from you, want to help protect it. For a long, tense moment, the Guardian remained motionless, its glowing eyes locked on Ethan. Then slowly, the ground beneath them began to settle. The tremors stopped. The Guardian's massive form shifted, the vines and branches that made up its body creaking as it stood still, as if considering Ethan's word. Lila opened her eyes, her breath coming in, shallow gasps. She looked up at the Guardian, her heart pounding in her chest. Please, she whispered. Let us prove that we can be trusted. The Guardian let out a low rumble, its massive head dipping slightly as if in acknowledgement. Then with a slow, deliberate movement, it stepped back, its glowing eyes dimming. The tension in the air dissipated, and for the first time since entering the forest, Ethan felt a sense of calm. Erlian stepped forward, his ancient face unreadable. Harry, you have done what many could not try, he said quietly. You have shown the Guardian that not all humans seek to destroy. Ethan exhaled, his body trembling from the adrenaline coursing through his veins. So we did it. Erlian nodded, for now, but know this. The balance here is fragile. The forest will not tolerate another intrusion. Layla smiled weakly, her energy nearly spent. Hero, we understand. Erlian gestured to the glowing orb on the pedestal. Harry, take the artifact. It is yours now, as a symbol of the alliance you have forged. But remember, the forest will always watch over it. Ethan approached the pedestal, his heart heavy with the weight of the responsibility they had just assumed. As his fingers closed around the artifact, he felt a pulse of magic, not of raw power, but of life itself, a reminder of the balance they had sworn to protect. They left the ruins in silence, the weight of their trial pressing down on them. The forest, once ominous and foreboding, now seemed alive with a new energy. The trees whispered in the wind as if acknowledging the change. When they finally emerged from the forest, the other students were waiting. They looked at Ethan and Lila with wide eyes, but no one spoke. Professor Talia stepped forward, her gaze sharp and assessing. "Yuvin returned," she said simply, "and Yuvin brought the artifact." Ethan nodded, handing the artifact to her. "We found something much more important than the artifact, Cray," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "Dear, we found a way to protect the balance of the forest." Talia studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Yeah, good. You've passed the trial. But as they left the dark forest behind, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that their real trial had only just begun.